success, especially in the business world, want to start a business, I actually think they should get a job. And I think if you read Robert Greene's Mastery is a great example of number one, finding an industry that you're passionate about, and then working for a rocket ship company within that industry to where you can build specialized knowledge or a certain set of skills that will allow you to provide much more value to the marketplace than you could otherwise, especially starting from scratch. So a lot of people don't like to hear when I give that advice to get a job, especially in the early phases. But I know for me, that was one of the biggest things that tremendously helped.
Just because you might not want to hear it doesn't mean you need to hear it, Fire Nation. And today we're talking about how a $30 million per year sales team was built in 2 years. And Cole, you've created a process, 7 steps to go from 0 to $30 million a year. Let's break that process down.
For sure, we can go into it. So the first stage will be validating the offer. So a lot of people listening to this probably have that, but essentially it's finding out kind of like what you're selling and sort of how are you selling it, okay? And so it's setting the right foundation from the start. So you need to, typically in our world, it's like we do high ticket coaching, high ticket consulting. So typically people are like, they need to sell something couple dozen times and figure out at what price point, et cetera. So that's a pretty basic, like phase 1. Phase 2 is developing what's called your optimal selling system. Okay, so that's a term that is coined by Mark Ford, and he wrote the book Ready, Fire, Aim. He's the co-founder or co-owner now, I suppose, of Agora Financial, which is a $1.5 billion company. And essentially, that's figuring out sort of the scalable acquisition system you're going to use. And the key word there is system, because your inputs have to be correlated or equal to your outputs. So there's 2 parts of an optimal selling system when it comes to high ticket sales or really building any sort of sales team. Is number 1, a consistent, repeatable way to generate interest. So in other words, consistent, repeatable, scalable way to generate sales calls. Then the other one is a consistent, repeatable way to convert those sales calls into clients. Okay, so what does that actually look like? Well, one of my friends, Alex Ramosi, says there's 6 ways to generate customers or generate leads, which is owned media, earned media, affiliates, cold outbound, word of mouth referrals, and paid media. In my world, which is sort of the info marketing, high ticket sales, coaches, consultants, course creators, agencies, 99% of my clients, we've already had over 700 clients, is paid media. Okay, so they figure out a way to generate basically a consistent, repeatable, scalable amount of sales calls through a paid media channel. And so what we need both of those 2 things to be in place to essentially create kind of the conveyor belt, to where essentially at this point, where we have a validated offer, we have a consistent, repeatable way to generate the sales calls, and then the founder, whoever's the kind of like typically most companies, they'll either the founder will be the salesperson starting off, or what happens is they have a sales related founder. Okay, so they have basically somebody who is a business partner, but mainly handles the sales team, et cetera. Sometimes the sales and the marketing, and then you have an operations kind of integrator partner on the other side. And so the second part is obviously a way to convert those sales calls. So the sales founder or the sales integrator, the founder, whoever's taking the calls initially, is they need to figure out a consistent, repeatable way to generate or convert the sales calls into clients in a way that eliminates founder syndrome. So founder syndrome is like the thing where only I can sell my offer. Only, it's so unique that only I can sell it, right? And in the same way as any doctor can diagnose and prescribe a certain disease, any salesperson can diagnose and prescribe a certain problem and a certain solution, okay? But we need to have the conveyor belt in place to where we're generating a lead from the same context, the same way, consistently, repeatedly, every single day. So we're creating that conveyor belt, and then they only always show up with the same couple of problems. Does that make sense? So that's the second stage. Cool. The third stage is delegating the sales calls. So once the founder's at a place where there's a consistent, repeatable way to generate sales calls, he's converting those or she's converting those consistently, and the offer is validated, they're at a point where they can offload those calls to a sales rep. Now, the biggest thing I'll say about this stage is what's called the rule of 2. So you always want to hire 2. And the reason for that is the human brain can only understand the differences between things utilizing comparison, right? We only know what is day if we know what night is. We only know what light is if we know what dark is. Black is if we know what white is. Good versus bad, etc., right? So if you hire two, it's much, much easier to essentially know which one is going to be the better one. And to be candid, if they both don't work out, it's usually your fault, whether you didn't train them enough, you hired the wrong people in the first place, the systems are not there, the leads aren't there. If one of them works out, that's kind of natural sales churn. If they both work out great, now you have two good salespeople.
Here's a question on this though, is have you ever done this thing where you do the rule of two and you kind of use it as an averaging up technique where there's one obvious winner, you keep that person, but then you always bring on another person. So you're always at this two where, hey, maybe this other person you brought on is now even better than the other person. So now you're kind of averaging up as you go, always improving that sales team.
In a sense, you can do that. A lot of people can't do that because of the lead flow, and they can't like increase their lead flow that fast, that steadily. The other thing to consider is if a salesperson is converting into KPI, which let's say it's 25% for that company. If they're doing that, that means like you need to think of that salesperson as a singular business unit. Okay. So what that means is if that salesperson is profitable, let's say your minimum you need on return on ad spend is 4x, right? That's what works on your P&L. Well, if that salesperson, if you think of them as their own P&L, if they're hitting that 4x, we want to keep them there and we want to focus on building another business unit, which is AKA another salesperson. So yes and no in a sense, but it's not something to where we're constantly trying to recruit somebody to find these incremental improvements. Like if our goal is to only have one salesperson, we're not constantly trying to recruit new people and trying to get these incremental improvements and have one beat the other, because over time that's going to have drastic diminishing returns. And then also what's going to happen is because of the ramp time, which is the time it takes a salesperson to learn an offer and go from 0 to KPI, the loss you're going to get from the ramp time would mitigate any improvements you would get by doing that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. So stage 3 was delegating the sales calls. Okay. Now we move on to stage 4, which essentially stage 4 is the entrepreneur or whoever is the sales related founder stepping in to being a sales manager. So what happens is what I call the pendulum swing. So what happens is you're a high ticket entrepreneur, you went through this whole phase where you were taking the calls every day, you were doing the calls all day, every day, and you're like exhausted. You're so sick of sales calls. And when you finally get your sales team in place, you're like, oh my God, I never want to even look at a sales call again. Like you do a whole pendulum swing. So once the sales team person starts converting, they essentially look the other way and they're like, thank God I'm done with that. When in reality, what they need to do is they need to, instead of, okay, they just left being a salesperson, but now they have to step into and embrace and really build the skill of sales management. Okay. And so what does sales management look like as a quick primer? It's really a couple of things. Obviously, it's the first part is just kind of the administrative part. So making sure the calendars are full, communicating with marketing, making sure the salespeople are doing their admin, very basic stuff like that, making sure the tracking's up to date. And you can outsource that to an admin pretty quickly, which we'll talk about in a second. The next part is the training and coaching. So a sales manager, really at the end of the day, they are like the football coach of business in a lot of ways, right? And so they're constantly reviewing calls, training the salespeople, doing role plays, doing one-on-ones. It's essentially really a ton of QC, which is a ton of sales call review, film review, okay? People drastically underestimate how much reviewing of film, which is reviewing of the sales calls, the sales manager needs to do. And I think a great example of the importance of this is like when I played college football, I essentially, one of the things, we reviewed film more than we even practiced. That was like the main thing we do. And if you read Inner Game of Tennis, one of the things that talks about is the quickest way we can learn behavior is through modeling. And I don't mean like Tony Robbins modeling, like, okay, get a mentor and find out what they did, which is, it's kind of that. But I mean like physically looking and seeing either somebody doing what you're trying to do or having somebody critique exactly what you're doing through film. And that book talks a lot about how the quickest way to get good at any sport and sports performance is by film review or actually watching film of another person do it, right? So the last part, there's 3 parts of sales management. The last part is the leadership and the management aspect of it. It's really the leadership and the inspiration. So this is who's running the sales team daily meetings, how are they communicating the vision, mission, and values on that sales meeting, and finally doing one-on-ones with all of the sales team to make sure they're growing, make sure they're hitting their goals, et cetera. Just because the same way that we sell a prospect, and when we sell the prospect, we want to essentially make our offer the bridge between their current and desired situation of the prospect. We want to make our employment opportunity the bridge between the current and desired situation of our team member, right? That's what's going to keep them growing, wanting to be a part of our company for a long time. It's going to help our retention. So that's stage 4, which is essentially embracing sales management. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Stage 5 is promoting your sales coordinator. So remember, there's 3 responsibilities, right? So there's the admin aspect, there's the training and the coaching, and then there's the leadership. Well, if you're an entrepreneur, most entrepreneurs will tell you, man, I don't have time to be a sales manager. What I'd say is, to really cultivate a sales manager the right way, you need to do it with this framework. So the first thing you get rid of is the administrative. And you do that by hiring a sales coordinator. So that's essentially a $40,000 to $60,000 a year position that manages the calendar, makes sure they do all their admin, does all the tracking. Pretty simple. Okay. Stage 6 is essentially promoting what's called a sales lead, right? So remember, there was admin, training and coaching, and then leadership. So we got rid of the admin because we hired a sales coordinator. Now what we need to do is we need to promote a sales lead to take over the training and the coaching. So that leaves us with just the leadership, the inspiration, and running the sales meetings and doing the one-on-ones, which really at that point, it's boiling down our time, quote unquote, as a sales manager down to about 60 minutes a day. So how do we promote the sales lead? Well, typically what happens is when you get a team of about 3 to 4 people, somewhere around that number, essentially one of them is going to start to stand out as the superstar. And what you want that person to do is now start to help you in the sales meetings, start to review calls in their downtime of the other closers and help you train them, and give them a very, very, very small override as a player coach. The biggest mistake when it comes to this is people putting too much stock of how much work their player coach is going to do. Because the problem with sales is selling is selfish. Okay, and I don't mean selfish like you're, taking the prospect's money and you're not serving them. What I mean is, to really be an amazing salesperson, you have to be totally tunnel vision on your goals, right? Like how many, making cold calls, making your dials, taking inbounds, making sure you're making offers, hitting your pipeline. Like you got to be totally focused on your projections. It's sort of a selfish type of role in a sense. And I don't mean that in the bad way. I mean it in like, you got to focus on your thing. Sales management is selfless. So essentially sales management, you're basically taking all of the recognition, putting it onto the sales team, putting it onto the individual sales reps, and you're putting your own needs aside to support them so they can win. So because of that, there's something that's called the fallacy of the player coach, that it's very, very, very difficult for a player coach to succeed because you're basically asking them to balance the selfish and selfless activities, right? So you're like, okay, that makes sense. Well, why are you telling me to do a player coach? Because essentially when you're the founder, you need to basically get your sales manager kind of in training and get him or her essentially ready to take over the team. And you do need help on those training and coaching responsibilities. However, you still need them to do their personal production, and you don't want to overpay them for coaching when in reality they need to be still selling. Okay, because what happens is people will overpay the sales lead, and what they find is the sales lead essentially just still focuses on their own personal production, and then they just make a ton of override for basically doing nothing. So we're talking, $1,000 to $2,500 a month, very, very small override, very, very small percentage of their income. They'll spend 80% of their time still selling, and then 20% of their time essentially helping you with call reviews, helping you do a little bit of coaching, etc. Stage 7 is when you finally have cultivated that lead into a sales manager. And this is truthfully, I call this the 7 steps to automatic selling. Once you have a sales manager in place, it's kind of the holy grail. It's kind of sales nirvana, because now you're finally in this place to where your sales team runs on autopilot each day, day after day, without any input from you, without you having to do anything. But keep in mind, while it is possible, like for me, for instance, we do $2.5 million a month, every single month cash, and we have a big sales team. and I don't train the sales team. I don't talk to the salespeople. I don't even recruit or staff or any of that. Even though that's my core skill set, I don't do any of that anymore because I've built up these leaders and I've worked this 7-step process. So that's how you really get it to where it's running on its own. However, you have to embrace, number one, the skill of selling, because you can't teach somebody else to sell unless you've learned to sell yourself. Then number two, you got to embrace and learn and cultivate the skill of sales management, because no great sales team is, imagine a great sports team that has no coach. It's kind of silly, but like people want a sales team, but they don't want to lead the sales team, right? So you have to cultivate and build the skill of sales management so that, number one, your sales team succeeds. But number two, you could transfer that skill to eventually your sales manager. And then you have it on autopilot.
I mean, Fire Nation, I hope you were taking notes, because that was value bomb after value bomb. I mean, we could go through all 7 of those steps right again, but I'll tell you the 2 that stood out to me a lot was delegating sales calls. Like, I loved that rule of 2, the hiring of 2 reps, because how can you compare black and white if you don't know white or you don't know black? So that was so cool, the rule of 2. And then the fallacy of the player coach, like that really opened my eyes up. I mean, the balancing of the selfish with the selfless, that really made me think. Now we have the 3 keys to managing a high performance sales team and so much more when we get back from thanking our sponsors. Are you ready to grow your business now? What if you could learn the proven systems and processes that have been used to grow thousands of multi-million-dollar success stories? At thrivetimeshow.com/EOFire, see how Clay Clark's proven business coaching has helped thousands of entrepreneurs to increase profitability dramatically. Clay's proven business coaching program is month to month and less money than hiring an average minimum wage employee. Sound too good to be true? Go to thrivetimeshow.com/EOFire to see thousands of documented success stories. Because Clay only takes on 160 clients, he personally designs your business plan for you. Then Clay's team of talented designers, videographers, web developers, workflow mappers, and accounting coaches will help you implement that proven plan. See thousands of verified success stories and schedule your free 101 13-point assessment with Mr. Clay Clark himself today at thrivetimeshow.com/EOFire. Knowledge will not attract money unless it is organized and directed through practical plans of action. Get your proven plan and schedule your free 13-point assessment today at thrivetimeshow.com/EOFire. This year feels like the official return of conferences and in-person events, and I'm very excited to be speaking live on stage at this year's Inbound 2022 event in Boston. Inbound 2022 is happening in person and online September 6th through the 9th, and Kate and I would love to see you there. This year, the in-person experience will include festival-style stages, including the podcast stage, What's Next stage, and the main stage. Aside from hosting a live interview on the podcast stage for entrepreneurs on fire, I'm fired up about the connections and inspiration that'll be all around us at this year's event. If you can't join us in Boston this year, there are several other pass options available, like the Starter Pass, which is your free ticket to the Spotlight Talent. Prices are increasing, and there are only a limited number of VIP tickets available, so be sure to check out Inbound 2022 today. Inbound 2022 is built by you, powered by HubSpot. Learn more or get your tickets now at inbound.com. Cole, we're back, and you broke down the 7 steps to go from $0 to $30 million a year when it came to a sales team. What are the 3 keys to managing a high-performance sales team?
For sure. So pretty simple: recruiting, ramping, and managing. So nothing rocket science there, but let's break those down. So the recruiting, essentially what we want to do is we want to find people who have 3 qualities. Number 1 is specialized knowledge. So they have to have done the thing that we want them to do, right? Naval Ravikant content, specialized knowledge is the knowledge you can get only from doing, right? So do they have a track record? Do they have experience? Number 2 is we want them to have industry acumen. So essentially what that means is every single industry speaks a specific language, And so in internet marketing, for instance, we have jargon. In car sales, they have jargon. In real estate, they have jargon. You want somebody as a salesperson who's going to either easily develop the jargon or already knows the jargon, because then they're perceived as inside of the tribe, and they're perceived as a salesperson who gets it, opposed to, I'm sure you've been on a call with a salesperson who's like, this guy doesn't get it. It's because he probably didn't know how to speak the language of your industry and what the problem was. The third thing is buy-ins. We want people who are bought in to our mission, our vision, our values, the product, and the market. right? They have to resonate with the market because they're going to be talking to the market all day. They have to resonate with the product and have conviction in the product because that's what they're selling. And conviction is really, at the end of the day, the most important thing a salesperson can have. They have to have resonance with the vision, which is where we're going, the mission, which is why we're going where we're going, and the values, which is how the team is going to interact on the journey of going where we're going. So we want those three qualities. Now that we know who we're looking for, where do we actually find the person? Well, there's a lot of different avenues you could find salespeople. The number one thing I want people to remember is that good salespeople know other good salespeople. Okay, because typically a salesperson performs in a team. So if you have a salesperson who's been on 3 or 4 teams across their career, they probably know anywhere from a dozen to 30 or 40 salespeople. And they're going to know the good ones that are from the bad ones, especially if they're good, right? Because then they were probably on a team with all of the A players. So the first sales team I was on was built by a guy who was the top sales rep at Southwestern, which is a books door-to-door company. And it was built, I was like the straggler that kind of came out of nowhere. Everybody else on the team was from Southwestern and was also really good at selling books. Why? Because good salespeople know other good salespeople. The way I started my company is I was a pretty accomplished, very well-known, high-ticket salesperson who had a lot of success, and I kind of had a little bit of following because I was a lot of high-ticket closers, favorite high-ticket closer. And because of that, I would get asked by entrepreneurs all the time, where can I find good salespeople? Do you know where I can find good salespeople? And I started just naturally connecting good salespeople I knew with entrepreneurs, and eventually I turned that into a business. And it's still today where we get most of our recruits. We get most of them through utilizing our network. So the number one place to look is find good salespeople and ask them, who do you know? Right? Do you know any good salespeople? Pay them, $2,500 or $5,000 even if the person sticks past 60 days or 90 days, whatever you're comfortable with. The next thing is you can outbound. So you can essentially go to existing salespeople with a role that resonates essentially with whatever you're selling. So if you're in solar, do it with solar. If you're in coaching, do it with coaching. You can basically reach out to people and offer them a better offer than what they have, right? So poaching, that obviously works. You can leverage your audience. You can leverage your list. You can leverage referrals. Pretty simple stuff there. And then after that, you can obviously use paid media and job boards, which isn't the most effective. But if you really do a lot of it and you do a massive amount of volume, you can find good people. And typically what I find is it's very, very hard for individual entrepreneurs and very small teams to do that because you need a recruiting department. But for a company like myself, like we interview probably 400 people on behalf of working for our company a month, right? That's just our company. That's not people we're interviewing for clients, which is almost 1,000 a month. This is just 400 people for us. And the way we do that is through group interviews. So that brings me to my next point is how do you actually have a filtering process to filter the good sales reps from the bad? Well, we have them apply. And after they apply, they do a video application. If the application's iffy, then they get moved to a group interview. The group interview is key because of what? Because of comparison. Because we can get 10 people on a Zoom call with gallery view, and we can essentially see the good from the bad. It's very, very easy to tell who's the top performer when you see all 10 at once. It's very hard where you're interviewing them one by one by one. So the group interview is one of the biggest breakthroughs we've had for our internal recruiting, not just with sales, but for any position. And this works literally with any position. It can work with executives. It can work with salespeople. It can work with operations, any position. And so essentially what you want to do on these group interviews is you want to just start by asking basic interview questions and not calling on people, but seeing who jumps in first. And then who jumps in first, along with who has the most original responses, are the things you want to look for in this basic group interview screening call. Because a lot of people will model, a lot of people won't take initiative, number one. Secondly, a lot of people will play it safe by modeling their answers off the leader, right? You can also see the differences in people's energy. And then finally, we end that interview off with asking the question, if we didn't hire you, you can't say yourself, but if you were me, who would you hire on this interview? And you can't say yourself. And they typically pick the top performer for you. So that also works. Then we move them to a one-on-one screening interview, then a mock call or some sort of skills assessment. Then we move them to a scorecard interview, which is where we basically review the scorecard kind of from the book Who, if you know what that book is. And that basically creates clear agreements on what the position is all about and the performance expected from the position. So that is how we interview them. Now, what does my interview process actually look like? So there's a couple of phases. There's introduction, there's work history, there's CBBI, there's inputs, there's attitude, and then there's career fit. So let's break those down. Introduction is a little bit of rapport. And then I'll just ask, like, what prompted you to reach out about the company? Is there anything, that interests you about this role? Just real basic stuff. I'll also float out a few qualifiers to make sure they're like worth me talking to. So do they know it's 100% commission? Do they know it's fully remote? Do they know it's full time? Just basic stuff to make sure, like, okay, this person is, I could spend the half hour with this person and not waste my time. Then we go into work history, which is also pretty basic. We want to outline their last 3 positions, what they did, what they accomplished, what were the KPIs, what were the results, and essentially see just kind of how those went, what they, all the things I just said. And also we want to see, did they make upward transitions? Like, is there an upward trajectory, a sideways trajectory, or a downward trajectory, right? We want to look for the upward spiral momentum. The next thing is CBBI questions. So that's called competency-based interview questions, I believe. Yes, I think that is what the acronym stands for. But essentially, this is what it is most people ask situational questions during their interviews. So let's say, hey, I'm John Lee Dumas. I'm hiring a podcast editor. If I gave you X, Y, and Z task in the first 90 days, like, tell me how you would go about handling that, right? Or let's say you're hiring a marketing director. It's like, okay, great. So, our goal is to generate X amount of leads a month, and eventually those leads turn into this amount of clients. With that goal in mind, what would you do in your job in the first 90 days to be able to accomplish that goal? And they kind of see, like, what the person would say on the spot and how they would solve the problems creatively and so on and so forth. I do not recommend questions like that. They're not bad, but those questions have a flaw. The flaw is that it's assuming that it's assuming the person is going to do successfully what they say they were going to do. Okay. So for instance, you might say, hey man, I want to take on 100, I'm hiring a marketing director. You might say, hey, our goal is to acquire 100 clients a month at a 5K price point. Right now we're starting from 0. In the first 90 days, what actions are you going to take to set us up for that goal? They might tell you about this funnel and how you should do it with ads and all this different stuff, but it doesn't mean they could actually do that. Okay. So CBBI questions are not situational. They're very different. They assess competency not by assessing what the person says they're going to do, but actually by what they've already done. Okay. So for instance, Warren and Charlie, when they're Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, when they're assessing managers for the companies they invest in, they don't look at what somebody says they're going to do or the projections. They look at track record, right? Because past performance is the biggest indicator of future performance. So what does a CBBI question look like? It always starts with the phrase, tell me a specific time when. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I might ask a sales rep, tell me about 2 specific instances where, despite having to deal with either lead quality or a very difficult prospect, you were able to go extremely above and beyond to push these 2 deals across the line. So walk me through that sale. What exactly happened? And by that question, you're going to get a very descriptive answer that's going to demonstrate competency as a sales rep. The other thing you can ask is, you might say, hey, so John, at X, Y, and Z company, were there times where lead flow just kind of wasn't up to par?
Oh yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, there was tons. Okay, but you're like, what month exactly was probably the worst? Oh, it was the month of May of 2021. Okay, gotcha. Cool. Like how bad was it? Was it 50% as good? Oh, was it, it was like it was like 50% as good as it used to be. Gotcha. So John, tell me about tell me exactly the specific actions you took during that month to still hit your projections despite lead flow and lead quality not being up to par. So you see how I teed them up for that question. And also, they can't fake the answer to that question. Now, here's how they will try to fake it. They will tell you in generalizations, not in specific stories. So what they'll say is oh, well, generally, if lead flow is not where it really should be, I will do this, I will do this. No. What they should say is, look, in May of 2021, I mean, it was bad. Like, we were getting people on the phone who didn't even know who we were and weren't even in our industry. So I basically had to take things into my own hands. And what I did is I made a rule that instead of 100 outbound dials a day, I was going to make 250 on top of the lead flow I was getting from the company. And on top of that, I was going to do, I think you get the point, right? They're going to tell you what they actually did, not a generalization. So that's CBBI questions, competency-based behavioral interview questions. That's what the acronym stands for. And then the next one is inputs. So we want to assess their inputs because great inputs lead to great outputs. So for instance, a lot of people think that Einstein was just born a genius right out of the womb, but he was heavily influenced by Newton. A lot of people think Newton was also a genius, but he was heavily influenced by, I believe, Galileo and a few other philosophers. Right. So if you look at the greatest philosophers, it's a very interconnected web. If you look at the greatest, let's say, jujitsu black belts, I do jujitsu. It's a very interconnected web. It starts from a few people who trickle down to more people, and all of these greats are very interconnected. What they all have in common is they all learn from a master, right? Like I said earlier, one of the biggest things is get a job and really go into an apprenticeship. Because if you can be influenced by somebody who's great, you're more likely to actually have great outputs. So when I interview, essentially what I want to do is say, who is your biggest influence in sales? Who's influenced your selling style the most? What are the sales books that you've read? What are the sales programs that you've invested in? Like, what are your beliefs about sales? How would you describe your sales style? And who's been your biggest mentors? Who's impacted you the most? And you'll see, like, certain people, like greats, will be like, well, man, let me just look at my bookshelf. It's this person, this person, this person, this person, this person. Other people will say, man, I've invested over $100,000 in programs learning from this person, this person. Here's what I liked about this person. Here's what I didn't. People who are not so good will be like, my dad, because of this. And I'm not saying maybe their dad did influence them and their dad's, amazing and he's a great salesperson or whatever, but I think you get the point, right? If we assess their inputs, it's a great predictor of what their outputs are, and especially like anybody who's really great at anything, are they reading books about the topic? I mean, even if I don't think sales books are that great, to be candid, but I've read a lot of sales books. So that's inputs. The next thing is we look at attitude, which is very easy to look at. We're assessing essentially internal versus external locus of control. Then we look at career fit, which is essentially seeing, is this position the bridge between the employee's current and desired situation? So that's the interview process. And I can't go too deep into it because we probably don't have the time, but it's a very rigorous process. So when people make it through this, you're more likely to not make a mishire, which, as you know, and anybody who's built a company knows, making a mishire is one of the biggest costs in business. So when we can mitigate that and we can pretty much improve our success rate of the hires that we make, we do much, much better in the long term. So that's just recruiting. I actually did one of the three keys. I don't know if we have time for the other two.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's crazy how much value you packed in just 33 minutes so far. I mean, it is absolutely one of those episodes where people are listening. They're like, I just have to press the stop button here because I'm driving or I'm running and I need to be sitting down for this one, to be taking notes, to be hitting rewind button, to be going back over these things because they are super valuable. So let's just do this. You've given us a 7-step process. You talked about one of the 3 keys in managing a high performance sales team. You went into super in depth there. Let's end with a bang. Take a step back, share with us where exactly we can maybe learn where those other 2 keys are. How can we figure out with what you have going on websites, on podcasts, or wherever, we can get those other 2 keys. And give us one key takeaway from everything you shared here today. Like, what's one thing you really want to make sure our listeners get before we say goodbye?
A few things. I mean, if anybody's ever interested in working with us, like we place and train salespeople. That's on closers.io, closers.io. That's obviously my company name and the website. So that's number one. Specifically for the other 2 keys, you could probably find something on my YouTube channel. I think one of the most recent videos as I'm recording this, so something around June of 2022, is going to have a presentation where I break down those 3 keys. So there is that. And then one last takeaway, right? So I would say the biggest thing is a team or a company can only perform to the level in which it's led. And I think in our industry, when I say our industry, I mean coaches, consultants, course creators, agencies, kind of like the internet marketing industry in some ways. When it comes to this industry, there's not very many great leaders, just to be candid. And I think one of the things that really helped me get to $2.5 million a month, and if I look at even the people who are ahead of me, you look at people like the Hormozis or other folks that are doing, huge numbers in this industry, I really look at them and I see great leaders. And I think a lot of people like to think oh, it's because of this offer, it's because of this funnel, it's because of this idea, it's because of they have a big following. But at the end of the day, all those things can get you to a certain point. But after you get to a certain point, a lot of it is really your team, because you can't do everything. You know, you might be able to be the visionary, you might be able to be famous on social media, but at the end of the day, you have to have somebody integrating and executing. And so team is everything. And so I think if we have better leaders, I think we'd have better companies, I think clients would get service better. And I think overall, we'd have a better industry.
Fire Nation, wise words from Cole here. And one more time, Cole, I know you want Fire Nation to go to closers.io. What happens there? Like, how can they go into further contact with you at that site?
Right on the site, there's a video that explains what we do, and there's like a schedule button. So if you want to speak with our team, that's great. And I think, it's pretty self-explanatory from there.
Fire Nation is pretty self-explanatory that if you had your head blown off by these 7 steps from 0 to 30 million, and just for the first of these 3 keys to managing a high-performance sales team, that you need to take that next step, visit closers.io, book a call with Cole's team, have a conversation on how you can take whatever you're doing to that next level. Because you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. You've been hanging out with CTG and JLD today, so keep up that heat. Head over to eofire.com, type Cole, C-O-L-E, in the search bar. His show notes page will pop up with everything that we've talked about today. And Cole, thank you so much for sharing so many value bombs with Fire Nation today. For that, we salute you, brother, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Fire Nation. Today's Value Bomb content was brought to you by Cole, and Fire Nation. Successful entrepreneurs accomplish big goals. That's why I created the Freedom Journal to guide you in accomplishing your number one goal in 100 days. And we're talking step by step. Visit thefreedomjournal.com. I'll catch you there or on the flip side. Is this your year? Visit thrivetimeshow.com/EOFire to see how Clay Clark's business coaching helps thousands of entrepreneurs to dramatically increase profitability. It's month to month and less money than hiring an average minimum wage employee. Schedule your free consultation today at thrivetimeshow.com/EOFire. Business Made Simple, hosted by Donald Miller, takes the mystery out of growing your business. Recent episodes like how to attract and retain top talent and how to make more money with your current products are straight fire. Listen to Business Made Simple wherever you get your podcasts.